Hello guys, today I have something very different for you because I made up a language called Muataram and I want to tell you guys about it. I'm inspired by the videos of Artifaction and Biblaridion where they show you their process of creating a language because I think this solves one of the big problems with conlanging, mainly that languages as a form of art are very hard to appreciate. It doesn't happen with other forms of art. I mean, to appreciate a song, all you have to do is listen to it. To appreciate a movie, all you have to do is, well, watch it. But to appreciate a language, well, you have to learn it. And that's a problem because that's difficult. That's a pretty big time commitment. And yet, I think that watching videos where you see someone's creative process as they create language allows you to appreciate that language without having to actually learn it, which I think is great. Now, at first, I didn't actually set up to create a language. That wasn't my purpose. At first, I just wanted to write a science fiction story. In this story, there were two characters, and they were lying down in a snowy field, watching their stars, and they would be talking about mythology, telling each other short stories, and that's what the story was, just like short mythological stories from the future. But then something funny happened. In one of these stories, I needed a name for a character, and all I knew is that I wanted something that was easy to pronounce, but hard to pronounce at the same time. Something that sounded familiar and yet strange. And so it just came to me. Elkna. And I really liked this word because, yeah, it's kind of hard to pronounce because of this LKN thing. But also it's kind of easy, like you can get to pronounce it fairly easily. And yet it's weird, but not too weird. So yeah, I loved it. And then I asked myself, where is Elkna from? Like, what planet is she from? Because this was a science fiction story. And then it also just came to me. Elkna is from Olknaxar. And I also really like this word, Olknaxar. And so these two words, Elkna and Olknaxar, became like my leaf. Because have you ever read The Leaf by Nigel? It's a short story by Tolkien about a guy who is a painter and he one day paints a leaf, and this leaf is so beautiful that he just has to paint the rest of the tree, and then the tree is so beautiful that he just has to paint the landscape around the tree, and then he adds more and more detail, and it takes him his whole life to make this painting. It all just started because of one leaf. And then when he dies in the story, he wakes up in the world he had created and he continues to create it, which I think is beautiful because for Tolkien, paradise was just perpetual world building. I mean, that's so beautiful. And so these two words, Elkna and Olknaxar, were like my leaf because I found these two words so beautiful that I just had to create the language they came from. I just have to see how the rest of the language was. And well, so I decided to start creating words, right? And so, well, I have two words already, Elkna and Olknaxar, and I wanted more words, and I knew that these consonant clusters were going to be a big feature in this language because, yeah, we have this LKN cluster, right? And we also have this KS cluster, and Olknaxar ends in this trilled R. I speak Spanish, so the R sound I'm very familiar with this sound and I liked it. And so I knew that I wanted other words that had also a lot of consonant clusters. And so I started to coming up with them. For example, Cleor was light. And then some other words whose meaning I have forgotten by now. It was Olnitrios, I think. Olnitrios, I think another one was Uctria. But yeah, I mean, I made a a first batch of words of some like 20, 50 words, something like that. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. Because these words, olnitrios, uctria, and other similar words I had, well, they seem made up. They don't seem natural. It's just like if you ask a child to make up some word, this is what they would come up with. And so I decided that I needed to put myself some kind of guides in order to create words that would fit with these other two words, Elgna and Olknaxar. And the first thing I realized is that the reason I like these words and the reason I liked these consonant clusters so much, LKN, was because, let me draw like a mouth, like here's a nose, here's a mouth. If you, let me draw it better, like this. If you want to say this consonant cluster, you begin here in the alveolar ridge, right? And then you move to the velar place of the mouth, I don't know, and then you pronounce the K, and then you go back to the alveolar place of articulation and you say the N. So your tongue is moving all around your mouth. And so if that's what I liked it, I decided on one rule for the phonology of the language. The first rule: consonant clusters need to have different places of articulation. And so now that I have this rule, well, what kind of words could I make that follow this rule? Well, words like iktiki, iktiki. I really like this word. This means water. And another word I came up with then was uktga. Uktga. This means drinkable water. Now, in the future, I will make like a lore video explaining what is the philosophy of the speakers of Muataram and why they need to make the distinction between water and drinkable water. But for now, just look at these words: iktiki, uktga. Like, at first I had trouble. When I wrote this down, I was like, I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to pronounce this. But eventually, as you can see, I was. And I really liked the feeling these words leave in your mouth. Uktga. It's almost like this similar sensation as click consonants have. In fact, later I have been toying with the idea that maybe Muataram in the past used to have clicks that then evolved into these consonant clusters. But anyway, the point is that when I invented that rule and then I used that rule as a guide to create new words, I created words that I liked a lot. And so I was like, well, I need more rules. I need more rules to create better words. So the next rule I decided is that, well, in words like olnitrios, in these words like olnitrios and uctria, I am using very common consonant clusters like K, this TR, this KT. So I speak Spanish and English, right? So these consonant clusters are very common in the two languages I'm familiar with. And so I decided that I needed to use consonant clusters that were not common in the languages that were familiar to me. And so I decided that my second rule was going to be that consonant clusters like KR, TR, KL, NS, and many other consonant clusters that are, I made a list. All these consonant clusters that I consider to be common in Spanish and English were not going to be used. They were not allowed. And so I had to come up with some other kind of consonant clusters again. And then I remembered Irish. You see, I have been learning Irish in Duolingo, and Irish has some very interesting consonant clusters. So for example, if you want to say my family, you would say Mochlan. The phonetic transcription of this would be something like this: Mochlan. And here's the thing. This sound, this is the unvoiced velar fricative. And we have it in Spanish as well. But in Spanish, it is never forming part of any consonant clusters. In fact, when I was learning Irish in Duolingo and I heard these consonant clusters, like it blew my mind because I had never even imagined that it was possible to use this consonant in consonant clusters. But apparently it was. And so I had an idea. Right? Remember I had this word clear, which meant light. I almost liked it, except that this consonant cluster, this KL, was like too common. It was one of the consonant clusters that I put myself the rule that were not allowed. And so I had to change this or come up with an entirely different word. And so I thought, well, this is just the unvoiced velar stop, right? So what if I change the stop for a fricative? Like, that's something that can happen in languages naturally, right? So maybe what if speakers of Muataram change it and so clear became clear? And I really, really like this. I think it's very cool. And yeah, it seemed to like it was giving the language a certain personality. And it was a personality that I wasn't so much inventing, but recognizing. Like I would say like, yeah, this fits with Elkna and Olknexar, and it fits with Iktiki and Uktga. Like every time I create something new for this language, I think like, does it fit with everything else? Like, does it fit the same personality somehow? And it did. And so I realized that there was a sort of guiding principle that I was using with this language. And that guiding principle was that I wanted things that were familiar, but also strange at the same time. And well, this is of course familiar and strange to me. What is familiar and strange to me will not be the same for you. So this is a very subjective guiding principle, but I mean, this is art, so this is like, obviously art is subjective, right? So this is the phonological table I created for Muataram. And since I wanted it to be strange and familiar to me, I took the phonologies of the two languages I speak, Spanish and English. I mean, I also speak German, but not as well. And so I decided to combine the phonologies of Spanish and English and then start removing things, because of course I had way too many sounds. I wasn't just going to mash up the both phonologies. I wanted to turn them into something consistent. And so let's go piece by piece. And well, the first thing you might notice here is that there are no bilabial consonants, right? Like the only one we have is M. And well, this is very subjective. It's just I personally, for whatever reason, don't like sounds like P, B, or V, which is in Spanish. I think I shouldn't say like PB, this is the bilabial unvoiced plosive, the bilabial voiced plosive, and the bilabial voiced fricative. For that matter, I also don't like the bilabial unvoiced fricative. I don't like any of these sounds for purely subjective reasons, and so I decided that none of them would be on my language. But well, see, the thing is that by the time I was doing this phonology, I had already created a couple of words, including this word meoker. I have to move to a different layer. Meoker. And meoker means planet, but also fear. And I think I was just too attached to it. I just couldn't let it go. And so I said to myself, like, well, M is a very common sound cross-linguistically. I mean, and it is kind of cool that we only have one bilabial consonant, so I just left it there. Now, for the labiodental, at first I did left F. What happened here? Yeah, I need to change color. Yeah, so at first I did left F, but eventually I removed it. And this was very interesting because at that point I had a lot of words that had F, and to remove it I had to like make up rules of how like F had evolved into other consonants, and that had some interesting implications in my language. But we'll see that in some other video. But I mean, and the reason I left it is probably because like my name starts with an F, Fernando. My name is Fer. But also because one of the first words I came up with was also this word for I was sarf, inspired by the word self. And yeah, I mean, I like this word, and so I was like, well, if sarf has an F, I have to leave the F. Of course, I eventually removed it, but whatever. Also, I should point out that, as you can see, like there are a ton of linguodental consonants that I also removed. Like there is no the, there is no the. Well, I don't remember the phonetic names for these sounds. But I do remember the symbols. I don't know what that says about me. I didn't want these sounds pretty much for the same reasons as these ones. It's just like I subjectively don't like them for whatever reason. I mean, well, I know that I don't like this sound. Actually, this sound is in European Spanish, but I don't like it in European Spanish either, and I don't like it in English. So I was like, oh, well, all of these sounds gone, because I don't like them for purely subjective reasons. Then we get to, okay, you know what? I'm gonna lift alveolar sounds at the end because there are a ton of them. Well, here is just I like the postalveolar fricative, the sha sound. I mean, yeah, it's a sound from English. It's not part of Spanish, but everyone is so used to saying it that I was like, yeah, I'm gonna put it here. I also left the palatal nasal from Spanish, the famous ñ. Here what happened is that I originally wanted to have this sound that is like in chess and cheese and whatever. Actually, let me draw that symbol a little bit nicer. So yeah, that's in Spanish we'd call it che. It's in like chess, cheese. What's happening to me today? Why I'm not drawing it? Yeah, something like that. So anyway, the reason I have these two sounds here is because as I recorded myself saying the words of my language, I realized that I was using this sound in two slightly different ways in some words. And so it's like the language wanted to be that way. I mean, I didn't plan it, but I was consistently doing that without even trying. So it's like the language wants to be some way and I cannot tame it, you know? It's like it has a life of its own. And so I decided like, okay, so we are gonna have these two sounds that are two allophones of the same phoneme. And so I left this sound here because it's just like way too common. At first I didn't plan to have it, but then it's just like nasal consonants and velar things just like naturally evolve into these things. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna have it because it just comes so naturally to me. And finally here in the velar consonants, I decided to make a distinction between voicedness and fricatives and plosives. And this is interesting because, well, English has two of these sounds, the ka and ga, and Spanish has three of these sounds. No, well, actually, Spanish has all four of these sounds. So Spanish has all of these, and English has this. So it fits the familiar and unusual theme that I'm going for, right? But also, these two sounds, ga and ga, are allophones of the same phoneme in Spanish. So, for example, I might say, if I say cat in Spanish, gato, I say it like this. But if I say the word agua, which means water, I would say it something like this, agua. But I perceive these two sounds to be the same thing. And so it's interesting because here I'm using two sounds that I'm familiar with, two sounds that I use all the time, but here they are different phonemes instead of being allophones of the same phoneme. So yeah, that's familiar and yet different from what I know. And now I think that I finally have to tackle the alveolar column. So yeah, like here we have like all the sounds, this language. And let's first analyze what is going on in here, because this is funny. Let me make another layer for that. And so what's going on there is that when I was learning English, I have to learn how to say this sound. the retroflexive R, which is in words like car and like, well, car. Let's just put one example. You know the sound. You speak English, apparently, if you are understanding what I say. But Spanish has other two R sounds. We have the ere, which English also has, now that I think of it. It is in words like through. Well, I guess depends a little in your... let me put the phonetic transcription. Car. Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on your dialect if you have this sound in English. But I think in standard English, the phonemic transcription of through would be something like this. Through. And we also have it in Spanish in many words like caro, come to think of it. Caro means expensive. There. And finally, in Spanish, we have the trilled R, the ra, which many people have trouble with. I mean, I had trouble making this sound when I was little. I couldn't say it until I was like 5 or 6 years old. And we have it in words like carro, which means car. And so you see that here we have a minimal pair. Caro and carro are only different. Carro. So caro and carro are only different because the difference between ere and r. So I wanted Muataram to have all of these sounds and all of them be different phonemes. And and one of the examples of this is the word rararar. Ra, ra, rar, rararar. And this word means easy because it's like an inside joke, because it's obviously not an easy word to say if you are not familiar with Spanish and English, or I guess some other languages that have all of these sounds. And so yeah, I mean, I don't know, I really like to have all these R sounds. But I know that, I mean, I'm not making an international language, so I don't have to worry about pronunciation. Because for Japanese people, I think, would have a really hard time with this, because I also have L, so it would be very hard for Japanese people to learn this language if they wanted. But anyway, and so that's why we have all of these R's here. Then, well, normal stuff, and we have like N, T, S. Here we have tsa and tla. And it seems that I'm breaking my rule, right? Because I just told you a couple of minutes ago that I don't want consonants that share the same place of articulation. But then, as I looked into it, I started to realize that tsa can be understood not as a consonant cluster, but as its own thing, as a consonant by itself. And I mean, at first I was torn on this, like if I should include it or not, but eventually it grew on me. I kind of liked it. Similarly with tla, like you can also see it as I mean, in Spanish. Okay, so let me start over. So what happens is that this is a very common sound in Nahuatl, which is the language of the Aztecs, and is still spoken by 2 million people in Mexico. And this sound made its way into Mexican Spanish. Maybe not into Spanish spoken in other places of the world, but in Mexico we use it all the time because there are many name places that have this sound. Like, for example, Tlaxcala, which is a city, Etla, which it's a town. Actually, there are several places named Etla in Oaxaca. Also the Popocatépetl volcano. It's a very nice volcano, very pretty to see from a safe distance. And so anyway, so this sound, like, it's very familiar to me. And I don't know, I think it's interesting to put it, I mean, because I was combining the phonologies of Spanish and English, right? And so it just seemed like a nice inclusion to put this sound that is familiar to me in my specific dialect of Spanish. Finally, well, we have L here, but let's look at this sound. And this is, like, I always forget its name, is the alveolar lateral fricative. And it's a very interesting sound. I first learned about it because my linguistic teacher told me that the name Floyd, as in the band Pink Floyd, came from a Scottish name that was, so Floyd came from the Scottish name Floyd. And I'm not sure how Scottish people would write this. I write it with an LH because I don't know, it just makes sense to me. But yeah, Floyd came from Floyd. And like when I say this to people, sometimes they don't hear it, they hear FL, which is very interesting because whatever phenomenon caused this mutation, like it still exists, like it would happen today. But I don't know, when my linguistic teacher told me about this sound, I think its linguistic symbol is this. I don't know, I really liked it. And so when I came with the phonology for Muataram, I said like, well, okay, I know that I'm combining sort of the phonologies of Spanish and English, but it would be nice to have a sound that doesn't belong to any of them, that where this hla comes in. And I really like this. I think that it really sort of completes the set. It's that thing that I'm telling you that it sort of, I think, fits the personality of all the other things. And yeah, just one last thing before we finish today with the phonology of the language, I want to tell you about the vowels. Well, English has a ton of vowels, and even to this day I struggle a lot telling the difference between them. Even with the IPA symbols, I cannot tell apart this sound from this sound, or I don't know, there are like a million different sounds and I cannot tell any of them apart. And so I think it goes like this. So I decided like, screw all of this. Something is weird with my Photoshop today. Anyway, so I said, screw all of this. I'm just gonna have the nice 5 vowel system Spanish has. A, E, I, O, U. Wait a second. Remember when I told you that I didn't want to have bilabial consonants because I don't like them for some reason? Well, U, this U, is a rounded vowel, which means that to say it, you sorta kinda need to use your lips. And that doesn't fit the personality of the rest of the language. So what could I do? Well, let's take a word like, well, hursum. This means bubbles. And so if I didn't want to have this rounded vowel, I could just say this same vowel but not round my lips when I say that. So how would that sound like? Well, it sounds something like hursum. And I really like that. And I decided to use the letter Y to indicate this U without rounding. And here's the thing. I would love to tell you what is the IPA symbol for this vowel I'm using here. But for the life of mine, I cannot. Like, I go and listen to the recordings of the different vowels and they all sound the same to me. I cannot tell the difference. So yeah, I mean, at least I know that I'm being consistent. I know that whenever I use this sound, I'm just like saying U without rounding. U, like hursum turns into hursum. And so yeah, I mean, the important thing is to be consistent, right? Is to like always use sounds in a consistent manner. And I'm doing that even if I'm not sure like what is the international symbol for that sound. I think it's not the end of the world, right? Well, anyway, I think that's it for phonology. In the next video, I'm gonna start showing you some of the words I created using this phonology. And I mean, you already saw some of them, like hursum or hlior. But we are also gonna see how, as I started inventing these words, almost unintentionally, I started creating a world. Because it's something funny that happens. Like, languages always come with a world. As I started inventing the words, I started having like glimpses of the speakers. I started having glimpses of the world they lived in and how they perceived that world. And it's very funny. It's like the language is alive. the language, you cannot create a language without creating the world that language lives in. Or at least that's what happens to me, and we're going to explore all of that in the next video. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Please subscribe, give a like, and yeah, thanks for watching again.